welcome back to the channel. I'm doing a little quick video concentrating on the M2 competition. What I'm going to look at today in a bit more detail, and I have mentioned it over the last couple of videos about this car, I'm going to look at the sort of more individual settings that you can play about within the car. So in this car you can go through the iDrive system and you can adjust various parameters, things like the throttle response, you can adjust the steering weight, you can adjust the speed, or the ferocity as BMW call it, of the gear change, and you can adjust how much or how little interference you want from the stability from the traction control system. Well, they're all individually adjustable. You can do it when you're on the move, but in addition to that there's a couple of buttons on the steering wheel, the M1 and the M2 buttons, so you can preset those buttons with various different parameters. Okay, so if we just, let's start the car up. And you get the usual display of lights on the dashboard when it first lights up, leaving you with the handbrake on and a little bit of a service indicator. Then it drops into the normal sort of display on the dashboard. But the bit that's relevant to us is bottom right. So at the bottom of the rev counter there, you've got three little indicators. The one in the middle is the gear position. So at the moment we're in P for park. We'll leave that in there for now. On the left it says efficient. There's a picture of a rev counter. So that's the sort of throttle sensitivity, or the fly-by-wire throttle. It's set in, it's most efficient, it's most fuel efficient when we're talking about efficiency, set in there. And on the right it's got the steering weight. So it's got electric power steering in this car, and the steering can be set to different weights depending on the kind of driving you're doing, and I'll talk you through how I use those different settings. So then if you look down towards the I was going to say the gear stick, but it's just the selector for the double clutch transmission, you'll notice there's some buttons down here. The top one here is stability control off. So that's a fairly straightforward switch on the dashboard. If I press that switch, you'll get an indicator that the traction control stability control is just off. There are only really rare occasions that I will switch the traction control off. If you watch that old video that I did in the M135, in that one we looked in the snow, when we were driving in the snow. In that one we looked at the benefits of having the traction control off. A little bit of wheel spin can help you sometimes in the snow, but I wouldn't ever tend to switch the traction control fully off. But there is a mid setting, and I'll come to that in a little bit. So the traction control back on again now. The next switch down, this is the one that gives us different parameters on the throttle sensitivity, or the accelerator sensitivity. BMW will call it something like drive mode or something like that, but really all you need to know about that is that the car doesn't have a direct mechanical link between the accelerator pedal and the throttle bodies, or the throttle on the fuel injection. There is an electronic device, an actuator on the pedal and an actuator on the throttle, on the engine itself, and it sends a signal between the two. It sends it through what's called the CAN bus system, but what it means is that they can pre-program different settings into the throttle sensitivity. So at the moment on the dashboard there, you can see that it's in efficient mode. So what that means is that when we set off, it doesn't give you a fierce throttle reaction, it gives you a nice gentle reaction to the throttle. You've still got all the power available there, you just need to press the accelerator harder to get what you want if you want that full acceleration. But it actually makes the car quite relaxing to drive, and it's still relatively responsive, to be honest. It's still got all the power and all the torque available. It's like almost like a linear action on the throttle. Gives you, however much you move it, you just get a little bit more and a little bit more. It never really kicks in very strong, and I'll be honest with you, when I'm driving around, when I'm doing the commute, when I'm pottering about and doing my own stuff, that's pretty much the setting that I've got it in. If we press this button though, you'll see on the dashboard the next setting is Sport. So in Sport it gives you a shorter throttle response. So it's almost as though you in effect shorten the throttle cable, if you like. You don't need to press the accelerator as hard to get more performance out of the car. It's opening the throttle wider for a smaller push of the accelerator, and I suppose the clue's in the name really, it feels a little bit sportier to drive with a sportier accelerator, sportier throttle setting on there. The next setting is Sport Plus. So what happens with Sport Plus is it gives you an even shorter throttle travel, so you only need to push the accelerator quite gently to get a really good shove and a really wide opening on the throttles. At the same time, it opens up some extra valves in the exhaust. It gives you a fruitier exhaust note. This car has some kind of electronic system that pipes engine noise into the car through the speakers as well. So, and I think it sort of enhances that a little bit just to give the car a bit of a sporty feel. I don't mind it actually, to be honest. Some people complain about that, saying it's an artificial noise, but I actually don't mind it. I quite like it. So that's your 3 settings on the accelerator, on the throttle setting, if you like: efficient, sport, and Sport Plus. So then we've got this button here, a little picture of a steering wheel on it. This is the weight that's added or taken away from the electric power steering. So I think the first setting is Sport, then you've got Sport Plus and Comfort. Default is Sport. So rather than, unlike the engine which defaults to efficient or the softer setting, the steering in this car defaults to Sport. If you put it in Comfort setting, it makes the steering very light. I suppose if you're driving around town, or if you're doing a lot of parking and a lot of shunting around, you probably want it in that lighter setting. That middle setting, Sport, I think that's a sort of ideal compromise. I tend to leave it in that all the time, or most of the time anyway. Then you've got that Sport Plus setting, which really quite weights the steering up quite a bit. Now ironically, the only time when I genuinely think that that's a benefit is when you're driving along the motorway, because when you're on the motorway you don't want to be making any sudden moves in the car, and having that additional weight to the steering actually sort of helps calm down, smooth out your lane changes when you're on the motorway. So that's the 3 steering settings, and again these can all be switched. They can all be switched on the fly. We can switch between all these settings as we're moving along. You don't need to pull over, you don't need to set them. If you fancy lighter steering, or you fancy a more aggressive throttle, then you can alter it as you're driving along. The other button that you want to take notice of is this one here, and this is what BMW refer to as the ferocity of the gear change. So this effectively, I mean, I've discussed this with people online and tried to work out what it's actually doing, this switch, and I think it's just doing something with the throttle mapping. I don't actually think it's changing anything as far as the gear change speed is concerned, because it's a twin clutch gearbox, and actually the gear change is almost instantaneous. It goes from one clutch to another, it goes from one gear instantly to another gear. So I really don't think that it's altering the speed of the gear change, and I think that's why BMW refers to the ferocity of the gear change. I think it's doing something with the software and something with the throttle to give you a little bit of a kick and make the gear change feel a bit more sporty. So there's 3 settings on this one. If we press this button, if you look on the dashboard, so there's 3 settings on this switch. It needs to be in either drive or in the manual setting, in sequential setting. And you'll notice now that next to the gear indicator telling me I'm in drive and in first gear, there's just one little bar out of 3, and we can alter it to 2 or 3 by pressing that button. So in the first one, the gear change is set at its smoothest, and the gear change, it just takes its time a little bit. I wouldn't say it slurs it, I wouldn't say it's like an old automatic gearbox. It's quite a positive gear change, but it goes quite gently and smoothly, a little bit like the sort of gear changes that I teach in manual cars, nice and smooth and progressive. The second one, again, it's a middle setting. It's a little bit like the Goldilocks setting, isn't it? You know, there's one's too hot, one's too cold, one's in the middle, and that's just right. So the second setting gives you a little bit of a thump and a little bit of a quicker feeling gear change, and the third setting is right up at its sportiest setting, and that really thumps the gear changes home a little bit. So if you're doing gear changes where you're flat on the throttle and you're really accelerating hard, that really bangs the gear changes through. It does it in automatic mode, in drive as it's in now, and it does it in sequential mode when you're changing gear, either with the paddles or the gear stick or the gear lever. So the other parameter that we can play with a little bit is the stability control. So you see here on this switch, it's either on or off. There is a middle setting. There is a setting that BMW call MDM, M Dynamic Mode. And these systems are pretty sophisticated these days. And what that MDM, that M Dynamic Mode allows you to do is have the rear end of the car moving a little bit. So it will allow the car to oversteer a little bit. When I say a little bit, I don't know exactly how many degrees, maybe, I don't know, 15, 20 degrees, something like that. It will allow a little bit of rear end slip. So you get to do some sort of corrective lock rather than the systems kicking in and correcting that before it becomes oversteer. The car allows you to oversteer it a little bit and allows you to put some corrective lock on and allows you to control what's happening with the throttle in the way that you want to. It's like a real driver orientated setting, but it doesn't let you go too far. It will still intervene at a point where it thinks the car's going to rotate and leave the road. Now, as with any of these settings, you know, you've got to remember you can't overcome physics. I don't care how good these systems are. If you're an idiot, you can still overcome the grip that's available. You've only got those 4 tyres. But on the other hand, it's quite nice to sort of play around with this car a little bit more without turning the systems fully off. And have the car and feel the car moving and working with you, and bring that rear axle in, especially now we've got the full revs available in this car. You can bring that rear axle into play, you can get the car rotating in what's called yaw, which is that movement, and you can feel the car working all as a one to do that, but without the systems interfering, without getting that little dab on the brakes or that little bit of interference, that little cut of the throttle that you sometimes get with these stability control systems. My recommendation is you never go beyond that on the road. And the only time I ever use that system on the road is on a day like this where it's dry and there's plenty of grip. I don't think I'd be playing around with that system when grip levels are low, unless it was a completely empty wet roundabout and I had a good view all the way around and I just wanted to get a feel of what the car was doing. Other than that, I think we keep that mode to days like this where it's lovely dry weather, the road conditions are good, tyres are in good condition, etc, etc. So that's a lot. I suppose if we multiplied those together, there's probably hundreds of different parameters of those different settings you could have. You could have a really sharp throttle and a loud exhaust, but you could have a nice soft gear change and nice easy steering, or you could firm everything up but you could still have an automatic gearbox. You could have a gentler throttle but a more ferocious gear change if you like, or any combination of all those things. And that then is where these buttons come in on the steering wheel, the M1 and the M2 buttons. So these are pre-programmable buttons, and what we can do on these buttons is program the cars all those different settings, so that we just need to hit one of these buttons once to give us the settings that we want in different circumstances. So let's have a look at how we do that. So from the main menu we go to My Vehicle, click on that, and then you'll notice there we've got M Drive 1 and M Drive 2. So for M Drive 1, these are the settings that I have it in. I have the DSC, the stability control, on. So this is a slightly less hardcore, if you like, a slightly softer driver's setting. The engine I have in Sport Plus, so I've got that nice sharp throttle response, and we've got the engine valves open, and it's giving me all the engine's response with just small movements of the accelerator pedal. Steering, got it in Sport, so it's that mid setting, that Goldilocks setting. It's not too soft, it's not too hard, it's just about right. It's the right setting for the road for me. And the transmission I have in S2, so again it's the Goldilocks setting, it's in the middle, feels like a bit of a cop-out, but S means that it's sequential, so if I press M1 it immediately gives me control of the gears, and it's a nice all-round general road driving setting. So initially I'll get in the car, we'll drive it in the default settings, automatic, gear changes, all that kind of stuff, but once the road gets a bit more interesting like this one, I click M1, I'll press M1 now, you'll see that it goes into one manual, and all those settings are displayed there on the dashboard, so I know what the car's going to do. if we go back to the previous menu and go down to M Drive 2, this is a little bit more of a more sort of hardcore setting for me. So the DSC, the stability control, we've got that in MDM, in M dynamic mode, which is the one I was describing before. It allows a little bit of slip at the rear end, but there's still got that comfort blanket behind you that that it will catch you if you get it badly wrong. The engine is in Sport Plus. The steering, I've put it in that weightier setting. I'm in two minds about that, and actually while I've got it in, I'm going to change that because I think the sport setting on the steering is more than enough. I only really click it into that heavier steering when I'm doing a long journey on the motorway, and I want my lane changes to be nice and smooth. And the transmission in that setting is S3. Now what's interesting about this is if I want to select that mode on the dashboard, I press the M2 button and then it asks you to confirm, because what you're effectively doing is relaxing the DSC, and it gives you a couple of seconds and then it defaults back to the setting it was in before. So you have to press it once and press it again to confirm that that's the setting. And it gives you an indicator on the dashboard that the stability control is off. It's not actually off, it's just fallen into that MDM setting, and you've got MDM on the dashboard there next to the gear change, and you can see all the other settings in place. So that's how I have mine set up. If you've got one of these cars, share your thoughts with me, let me know what you think. Let's go and have a little bit of a drive now in both of those settings and see what we think. Okay, so to start with, it's just in default settings, efficient throttle setting, automatic gears, fairly gentle gear change, sport setting on the steering. And actually, if I want to, I'm using kick down without doing anything with the gears, I can still drive this car pretty effectively, pretty progressively. The chassis is passive, so nothing's changing as far as the springs and dampers are concerned, and it's still a really nice sharp drive. So don't think that that default setting is lazy or is too soft. It's a really nice setting. But I'm on this nice road now, the weather's fantastic. I'm in the mood for a bit of a drive. Let's click M1. And I've got manual control of the gears now. It's in 7th gear because that's what it was in automatic. So I'm going to click it down 3 gears, 4th gear, checking the mirrors. And now the car, especially on that throttle setting, feels a lot sharper. I'm only really brushing the accelerator pedal. And from that little brush of the pedal, the revs rise much more quickly. So looking down here, the road's going round to the left here. I'm on the brakes. When I come off the brakes, I'm going to go down to 3rd gear. It's on that quicker gear change setting, just the middle setting. So it doesn't necessarily thump the gear change through. What it does is a nice, smooth, but slightly quicker feeling gear change. And it's certainly the rev match is quicker. The revs come up a little bit quicker on the down change. There, you can hear it raising the revs. We've got that slightly louder exhaust note. A little bit more engine noise being packed into the cabin as well, but those valves have opened in the exhaust. And this is a really nice, quite lively setting to have the car in, quite a sporty setting. One thing you do notice, especially on a road like this where it's bumpy, where you're under acceleration, that stability control just occasionally kicks in. I get the flash on the dashboard, and it just unsettles the car a little bit. It's doing what it's supposed to do. It's recognising where the rear wheels, the driven wheels are spinning up, and it's controlling that by cutting the throttle, applying individual brakes, but it just takes away some of the flow of the drive when you're pressing on. That rear axle bounces around a little bit, and that's where the benefit of that MDM mode is. It doesn't intervene as quickly. It's not as quick to step in and catch you. But I think if I was touring across country, I think if we do go up to Scotland later on this year, as we're planning to, for a bit of a holiday, so get on those lovely Scottish Highland roads, I think I'll be having it in this particular M1 setting, that combination of the midpoint on the steering, the sharper throttle, the midpoint on the gear change, and stability control there, ready to step in, ready to help you if things start to go a little bit awry. So we're coming into a little village now. Let's drive through here. What I tend to, what you can do as well, just to click it back into normal mode, is we're in M1. If I press M1 again, it defaults straight back into the normal first press of the button default position. So efficient on the throttle, sport on the steering, nice soft automatic gear changes, and we've got the car back in auto again now. And the convenience of these buttons is probably a bit underrated. When I first saw that, I thought, it's just marketing bomb flat, I'll never use them. But being able to just click those chosen set, those individual settings that you've put in immediately on those buttons is very useful. Plus, if you're a bit of a car geek like me, it's nice to try each of these settings and see what you think and get a feel for them. So up until now, I'd had the M2 steering in Sport Plus, and I've just decided it's too stiff. It's too stiff a feeling on the steering, really, for properly sporty driving, for properly progressive driving. I like to have a little bit more assistance from the power steering. These electric power steering systems, they've been around for quite a few years now. They're a more efficient system than the old hydraulic systems. That's why they're fitted now. You get more efficiency out of the engine. They were criticised when they first came out for lacking feel, and yeah, a couple of the cars I drove with the early systems on, there was a bit less feel through the steering, but it isn't really a criticism you can level at this system. This has plenty of feel and feedback through it. Even though the weighting there's the artificial element to the weighting, I think the steering's got plenty of feel. It communicates well, gives you information. If we're applying the system of car control, the information phase, it's one of those sources of information to us. It's telling you directly what the front wheels are doing, how much grip you've got. It's telling you just how bumpy that road surface is I've got on that left wheel at the moment. So really good, useful source of information, having a car with communicative steering. So let's just bimble through this village in default settings, and a little bit more open road just on the way back to mine now. And I'll give you a quick demonstration of what the car's like in that M2 setting that I've set up. Okay, so we're just coming out of the village now. There's the national speed limit. I'm going to leave the settings as they are for now though. It's still quite tight and twisty up here. This isn't a road that you can get particularly progressive on at this point, to let it open up a bit first. It's one of those roads where people argue, well, this is a national speed limit road, you'd never do 60 up here. No, you wouldn't, but you can make a sensible choice. The speed limit is the limit, that's the maximum that you're allowed to do. Doesn't mean that that's what you should be doing. Look how tight this bridge is. I'm down to about 10-15 miles an hour over here. But just a little bit further up here, this road gets a bit more interesting and we can stretch the car's legs a little bit safely. So I'm going to engage M2 this time. So press it once, it asks me to confirm, press it again, and it's now telling me, orange letters, MDM, stability control is in MDM mode. I've got control of the gears, it's in the quickest or harshest setting on the gearbox. The steering's in Sport now rather than Sport Plus, and I think that feels better. Let's take a lower gear, third gear. We'll wait till we get past this runner, check the mirrors, start moving the car along. So when you change up, there's a little thump just through the transmission. You just feel it in the base of your back, just there, and that's that sort of setting on the gear change being a little bit harsher, a bit more ferocious. Down 2 gears. The rev match is really vicious as well, that comes in very quick. It's more of a blip of the throttle than a rev match. I suppose if you were going to take one of these on track, these are predominantly the settings you'd have it in. But it doesn't spoil the car for the road. It makes it quite a sharp implement on the road, especially that MDM setting. These lower gears, when the revs get around and the torque is really going through to that rear axle, you can feel the car just rotating gently. It's not massively oversteering. If anything, it's helping you through the tighter corners. The gas in, I could just feel the rear axle coming alive, moving to the right very slightly, and it's nice that the car isn't intervening and holding that back at that point. Now, one thing this car does, if you leave the gears alone in manual setting, you come down to a very slow speed, it changes down automatically to second and first. You can probably see that little shunt from the up change. We're on a 50 mile an hour limit road now. I'm not going to break any pots on here, so I'll click the M2 button again. It takes it out of all those settings. You can see the dashboard, those lights come off. It goes to efficient mode. It's up in 7th gear and we're cruising along at 50 miles an hour very nicely. That little Jekyll and Hyde character that this car has is reflected in these buttons. It's almost like you're switching it from one mood to another. It goes from relaxed and cruising along to really quite edgy and quite, I was going to say aggressive. It's not aggressive, it's just much keener, it's much sharper, it's more of a scalpel than a carving knife, if that makes sense. So that's the sort of individual settings that I use on this car. Thanks for watching. If you've enjoyed the video, don't forget to subscribe, give us a thumbs up. I know we're all restricted with lockdown at the moment, and I'm restricted to filming these videos on my commute to and from work. I've taken a little bit of a detoured route home, but it is a justifiable journey that I'm on. I am a key worker, so please stay safe, stick to the rules within reason. Let's look after each other. Hopefully this nonsense will be over and done with in the next few weeks. We can all start getting back to doing the things we enjoy. We can get out and use the cars and bikes a bit more. It's such a shame, isn't it? This weather's so nice, we can't get out and really enjoy our vehicles. But that's it for now. Share your thoughts in the video. If you've got a car like this or one of the other BMW M cars with these different settings on, let me know what you think of my choice of settings. Let me know how you use them. If you agree, if you don't agree, that's great. But for now, thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.